This episode begins with a heavy downpour, which will continue for a good long time. Thanks to the fresh crops from last time, I'm easily able to feed my chickens, bringing me one step closer to a generation of fully tamed hens. Of course, I still need to feed my pigs. Thankfully, the carrots are fully grown and ready for harvesting. I can't wait to have a bunch of little piglets running around. I used a few of the carrots for a quick meal and put the rest away in my cellar. Unfortunately, my food storage was getting a bit full. I would need more clay vessels soon. I emerged from my home to a couple of wolves sneaking around the edge of my homestead. For now, they weren't close enough to be a problem, but I would have to keep an eye on their movements. While the sky darkened, I began gathering more cattails. My beehives were nearly ready to harvest again, and I wanted to have plenty of material to make new skeps. I also needed a few planks for a new fence gate. You see, I had added a set of stairs next to my house, leading towards the fruit trees and the cattails. The gates were to make sure unwanted company couldn't easily sneak to my front door. Once daylight returned, I continued to gather cattails. One of the wolves used this chance to creep around the front of my warehouse. Meanwhile, a couple drifters had made themselves a home inside the building. I took care of the drifters and left the wolf alone since it hadn't noticed me yet and I had other things to take care of. Those other things included gathering honey from the skeps. Only a few of the bees got angry, and I got a decent amount of honey from all of it. I stopped to feed my chickens and realized one of the chicks was collapsed on the ground. Something had killed it, but the only thing that could have gotten over the fence were the angry bees. I wasn't sure if bees attacked other animals, but it was the only explanation I could think of. Each honeycomb hardly gave me 0.2 liters of honey. I wanted to see if I could fill a whole barrel with honey, maybe even turn it into mead. But that would take a huge amount of honey. While I contemplated how long it would take to fill a barrel with honey, I decided to gather more peat moss from behind the warehouse. I thought there was only a little left, but the more I dug, the more I found. It kept going under the sand and even seemed to go under the warehouse itself. I would have to finish gathering it all at a later date, not just because it was growing dark, but also because I would need enough soil to fill the holes left behind. The next morning greeted me with open rifts and unwanted guests, so I decided to do a bit of research. Soon enough, I would be adding a kitchen to my lovely little home, which meant I would need to construct a stove. I had some fire clay, more than enough for a stove or two, but not enough for the pieces I would need to build a crementation furnace. My prospecting had shown me a source of iron, which meant I was only a few steps away from steel. I just needed the right equipment to process it, and I would have enough for a tier 1. But if I wanted it to better withstand heat damage, I would need several materials I had yet to find. Even if I found the materials, I still needed a means to crush them into a usable state, which meant I would need to build a windmill. In short, there was no point in digging up all that iron yet. I couldn't even smith the iron into tools until I had enough bronze for an upgraded anvil. So I focused on what I could do, which was feeding my chickens. I was also running low on sticks, and between the tools, fences, ladders, and clay items I needed to make, I would soon need a lot more. So I smithed a new set of shears and a new saw blade and set out to get sticks. Unfortunately, the rain turned to hail, and I cried out with every golf ball-sized lump of ice which struck me. I stopped only a moment to check on the apple tree and was immediately mauled by a wolf. I managed to escape the jaws of death, but was finished off by hail the size of baseballs. I respawned and cautiously hurried to collect my things. Between the hail and the wolf, I thought it best to collect sticks in the opposite direction. I returned home, killed a shiver in my warehouse, and wondered if I should finally close off that one wall. Most of my projects had other steps which needed to be done first, so I decided to focus on one I could do immediately: the wine cellar. I wanted it to be big enough for the fruit press and barrels for every type of wine and other alcohol, and for shelves of jugs to store the finished drinks. I wasn't sure how many drink variants I could make, but I knew alcohol could be made from fruits, honey, and grains. I dug out a huge area, first with a shovel, and then with my pickaxe. I used rammed earth for the walls to keep the basement look, and bauxite cobblestone for the floor. I would eventually need to make lanterns to light this space, but torches would do for now. I also needed more wood, so I hopped on my raft and set out across the lake. I knew an area with lots of huge trees in both oak and walnut. The only downside was the locals, who were not inclined to share their resources. I also ended up with more logs than I could carry, so I gathered some cattails to make a basket and put anything that wouldn't fit in my pockets inside. I would eventually return for more wood and could collect the extras when I did. With all the extra logs, I decided to add a new addition to my warehouse: crates and shelves for more crates. The downside with crates is they only hold one type of item at a time. The upside is they can hold an absurd amount of that item. For things like wood, stone, and dirt, which I planned to have a lot of, a crate was the perfect way to store them. It also added to the aesthetic of the warehouse by adding another type of large storage outside of the chests. Back in my cellar, I used oak logs to look like support beams and walnut planks as the ceiling. It was the same material I had used in the food storage area. I needed a few more items for my warehouse and was met with a raging rift inside the building. I really did need to close that hole in the wall, otherwise rifts and monsters would keep appearing in places I didn't want. But that was a problem for later. Right now, I was busy setting up shelves and moving the wine jugs to look nice. I took a small break to check that my coal pit was piled all the way to the ceiling, and then made a whole ton of barrels to be placed in the wine cellar. I wish there was an option to keep the barrels closed for long-term wine storage. Oh well. I decided to make a few buckets and then check on my chickens. They are laying a lot of eggs, perhaps too many. I'm not sure I can eat so many omelets. It also seems like a new rooster is growing up, which means the old one needs to be permanently retired. I do wish my other flock would also get a new rooster. It would make it easier to reach the next generation. At least the chickens are likely to be fully tamed within another year or two. The pigs take so long to produce offspring. I think it'll be several in-game years before they are domesticated. I haven't even started on the goats yet. At this rate, my second summer will be over before I start domesticating them. With all there is to do, I must prioritize my tasks. So, naturally, I will gather my fruit press and fill my buckets with the fruit wine I already made before putting both in the new wine cellar. The wine in the barrels has an expiration date, but the wine in the jugs has no such date. I wonder if jug wine is good forever. And what about barrel wine? If it goes bad, does it turn to vinegar or rot? I suppose there is only one way to know for sure. In the meanwhile, I have a bunch of eggs which need to be used before they go bad. I also have far too many chickens. It may be time to thin the flock a bit and make way for the new generation. I also needed to fight a few more drifters and then make a couple doors for the cellar. I had noticed that the food wasn't lasting as long and could only conclude it was because the cellar had gotten too big. It would have been nice to have long hallways with spaces separated only by archways, but preserving my food was more important. Perhaps I could add archways elsewhere. The cellar, as good as done, I could consider the production of wine and other drinks. The pink apple tree wasn't ready yet, but at least one pear tree was. I gathered what I could, along with some birch logs. The light color of the birch wood was perfect for a crate for storing pears. I then harvested a lot of grain. This would be good for my chickens and for making alcohol in the cellar. The piglets were born. A whole little herd of them now scurried about the enclosure. Sadly, none of them fell through the half-block slots in the floor. It seems I would need a different approach to separate them from the herd. In the meanwhile, I grabbed some honey from the skeps. They were all full, but I made sure to leave 2 alone so the bees would spread to the new skeps. If I broke all of them, I'd have no more bees. I also learned I could not squeeze honey into a barrel. I had to do it over a bucket. At least I had a ton of beeswax now. I think I could use it for sealing crock pots, which would save on animal fat. I wondered if I could also use it for the windmill parts. I suppose I would find out next time. In the meanwhile, I wanted to try and make an alcohol with grains. I knew in real life the grains needed to be soaked in water. But then again, in real life, honey is mixed with water before fermenting into mead. And yet, in the game, the undiluted honey is what turns into mead. So, maybe I only needed to put the grains in the barrel. The grains did nothing, so I went to get water to fill the barrel and then add the grains. I was momentarily distracted by finding the wolf had made its way to the front of my house. Thankfully, we were separated by a fence, but we would likely cross paths the next time I needed to harvest my crops. Instead of worrying about wolves, I focused on having a water source in my cellar so I could easily fill the barrels. Sadly, the grains mixed with water did not lead to a new alcohol. According to the handbook, I needed to grind the grains into flour. I was fairly certain that in real life, the grains are used whole for this process, but I wasn't absolutely sure. What I did know was I now had 2 reasons to build a windmill. 1, to crush stones of certain types so I could eventually make steel, and 2, so I could make grain flour much faster. The quern was great, very relaxing. I just didn't want to spend all my time grinding flour. It was worth it for now, since the rye flour would soon become rye ale. I knew where I wanted the windmill. I just needed to adjust a few blocks for symmetry. Mainly the floor and the walls. I also added some logs as support beams, since it looked nicer that way. My chickens continued to lay more eggs than I knew what to do with. If I stopped feeding them, they would stop laying, but that would also mean they would stop sitting on the nests. I needed the hens to brood on the nests so the next generation would hatch. I would simply have to put up with the excess eggs. If they went bad, they would become compost. I returned to the site for the windmill and started laying out floorboards. I eventually switched to slabs and realized the slabs were not directional the way the blocks were, so I had to pull up all the blocks and replace them with slabs. I also learned you could use the saw to turn planks back into boards, which was great since I needed more boards to make more slabs. I originally thought I'd use walnut for the doors, except that meant the walls would be oak, the same as the floor, and I didn't like them being the same. So I made the doors oak and the walls walnut. It looked much better. I decided to stop there since the windmill was a big build and would be better as its own video. Instead, I started crafting clay vessels and jugs for my food and alcohol storage. Annoyingly, you can only make one jug at a time. I only had enough patience to make 8, and decided if I needed more, I would make them some other time. While those burned, I decided to fix the pig problem. Actually, that's not true. I had originally decided to go capture some goats and grabbed fences, feeding troughs, and a ton of dry grass. Instead, I got distracted and decided to fix the pig problem first. The piglets may not fall through a half-block gap, but maybe they would run under a half-block gap. So I broke the fence on one side of the path, blocked it with slabs, and used more fences to make sure the pigs wouldn't climb on top of the slabs. I broke the other fence, blocked the path, and spooked the pigs. I also learned the wolf had fallen into the beast pit. Meanwhile, the piglets did in fact run under the half slabs to the other pen. Now I just needed a way to keep them there. I decided to dig tunnels under the main pen. The slabs would let the piglets through and keep the adult pigs out, and the 2-block drop would make sure the piglets couldn't go back. I just needed to encourage them to leave the penned area. This turned out to be much harder. I tried digging a second drop so they couldn't go back into the tunnels, but they just stayed at the bottom of the hole. I vaguely remembered something about piglets staying near the adult pigs. Maybe if I brought an adult pig over, they would follow it out of the hole. So I opened the fences and waited for an adult to go through. It didn't take long, but they were mad at me. The adults were aggressive so long as the babies were near, so I would need to fence the adult off somehow. This took several tries and one temporal storm before I succeeded. And sure enough, the piglets finally left the hole. They didn't stay out of the hole, but it was still progress. there was just one more thing I wanted to do. I collected some honey, then returned to the pear trees for more pears and the pink apple tree for some apples. I squeezed some honey into a bucket and then grabbed the pears and the apples. Just a bit of squeezing in the fruit press, and I had juice ready for the barrels. The pear juice would turn into perry, and the apple juice would turn into cider. I just had to wait. And of course, the best way to end this episode was to sample some of the previous year's red currant wine. A single bowl did almost nothing, but a whole jug had the room spinning. Sorry for the wobble. Thanks for watching, and take care of yourself.